Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show YouTube channel, and thank you for joining me today. This video is actually supposed to be scheduled to be published this Wednesday, but that got pushed back, and so now it is today. It is Friday. Internationally, if you just look at the coronavirus pandemic internationally, you see Russia, which is orange. And you see some other countries which are not reporting as much coronavirus cases. And as you just look at this, just like average daily cases per 100,000 people in just the past week, and the total coronavirus cases in the hotspots, it really is a dire situation as we are monitoring the coronavirus pandemic. Right now, more than 225,000 Americans are dead. The United States is red on this map, according to the New York Times. More than 8.5 million Americans have been infected with COVID-19 over these past months, as I have been covering this story. NBC News is reporting today that increase in COVID cases sets U.S. record at over 77,000 coronavirus cases in one day. Now, it is also worth noting that we did have something like this that transpired in July. Back in July, as the coronavirus cases were continuing to happen, we saw an exponential increase in coronavirus cases. And that exponential increase, it was just diametrically worse than what we saw in March and in April, when New York was going through the worst of the pandemic. So in July, we saw that exponential increase in COVID-19 cases. Well, now we are seeing that again, and it's actually looking worse. According to this article by NBC News, quote, the United States set a daily record for coronavirus cases on Thursday as the numbers soared past 77,000, topping the previous high set in July, NBC News confirmed today. Also, according to NBC News, the benchmark was hit as the pandemic has accelerated at a pace not seen since the summer, and as many local governments have reimposed restrictions to stop the spread of a virus that has killed already more than 224,000 Americans in the United States. During the presidential debate last night, President Donald Trump echoed his same theory, amplifying it, which we have seen local officials and also local public health officials and governors and Republican governors amplify this too. Yesterday, the president said that the virus, quote, will be gone soon, end quote. That is definitely not the case. Coronavirus cases are continuing to rise exponentially. Even if you just look at this from a national level, and not necessarily from a national level, but even if you just zoom out a bit and look at the individual states right now. In New York, it was reported earlier this week that Governor Andrew Cuomo in New York, he announced a travel advisory requiring a 14-day quarantine. According to these are the states. Arizona and Maryland have also added to New York's COVID-19 travel advisory. That means no areas are removed. Non-essential interstate between Connecticut, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania are discouraged. Statewide positivity rate is 1.3%. We suspect that what this travel advisory is according to this article, quote, Governor Andrew M. Cuomo today announced that Arizona and Maryland have been added to New York's COVID-19 travel advisory. No areas have been removed, end quote. And I think we are seeing this transpire in New York is because of the rise in coronavirus cases that we are seeing in these individual states. The president talked about how New York last night at the presidential debate, how Arizona saw that big peak, which they did. They did see that big peak, but the president also said that Arizona's peak went down and it went away. Well, right now, Arizona is seeing a rise in coronavirus cases again. According to the article by governor.ny.gov, quote, the advisory requires individuals who have traveled to New York from areas with significant community spread to quarantine for 14 days. The quarantine applies to any person arriving from an area with a positive test rate higher than 10 per 100,000 residents over a 7-day rolling average, or an area with a 10% or higher positivity rate over a 7-day rolling average. And it just goes on as we are seeing more red zones here in the country. We are now also seeing a rise in hospitalizations. According to science at Harvard University, he says, quote, the outlook sucks. Why a Harvard epidemiologist is so worried about rising COVID-19 hospitalizations this fall. He says, quote, we will see hospitals fill up more and more. We already are. End quote. According to this article by Boston.com, quote, despite what President Donald Trump continues to claim, Michael Mina says that COVID-19 isn't currently, quote, going away, as the president keeps on stating. Quite the opposite. Quote, the outlook sucks. It really sucks. Mina, an assistant professor of epidemiology at Harvard University, he told this to reporters during a press call Friday, expressing frustration about the lack of a coordinated national strategy to address, once again, rising COVID-19 infections and hospitalizations due to the coronavirus pandemic. As the Washington Post reported, at least 38 states have seen increases in hospitalizations due to COVID-19, which is a trend that cannot be explained by increased testing. 14 of those states also reported the highest number of hospitalizations that they have seen since the beginning of the pandemic, and that is concerning. I mean, the coronavirus pandemic began in January when this guy from Washington walked into this clinic, and the doctor's like, it's begun. The coronavirus pandemic here in the United States, it began back in January when we began to see these coronavirus outbreaks in Washington state. Then in February, it started to progress. And then on March, that's when it really did get serious. And since the beginning of the pandemic, which would essentially be around that time, we are seeing a rise in COVID-19 cases that we have never seen before. Record number of hospitalizations. I mean, it's just frightening right now. The article goes on, this is from Boston.com. The article goes on to say, quote, a silver lining, according to Mina, is the percentage of COVID-19 cases that can result in death has declined since the beginning of the pandemic. Experts attribute the trend to a variety of reasons, including doctors becoming more familiar with how to treat the disease and infected patients getting a lesser dose of virus particles due to face coverings and social distance. End quote. Also, earlier this week, Delta, which is an airline company, they added 460 passengers who refused to wear their mask to the no-fly list. Delta said wearing masks is, quote, among the simplest and most effective actions we can take to reduce transmission, and banned 460 mask-refusing customers and essentially put them on the no-fly list because they refused to comply. And they were not complying. They were not putting on their mask, which is essentially a very, very simple task. So they have now been added to the no-fly list. According to NBC News, quote, over 400 passengers won't be flying Delta anytime soon as a result of their alleged refusal to wear face masks during flights, according to an internal memo obtained by NBC News. But here is just one more thing before I end this special coverage. We are seeing a record number rise in hospitalizations. We also are seeing a record number rise in coronavirus cases all over the country. I mean, just looking back on that map from the New York Times and looking at it internationally, I mean, looking at the United States, we are in a terrible position right now. We are a poorly managed country. Coronavirus cases are continuing to rise, and we have a president who does not want to believe in science, who thinks this is a hard issue to talk about, who will deflect from this question and distract and interrupt any other person that wants to be serious about this topic and actually resolve this situation. More than 225,000 Americans are dead. More than 8.5 million Americans have been infected with the coronavirus. We are seeing school teachers die. We are seeing outbreaks at elementary schools and middle schools and high schools and college campuses and universities. We are seeing a record number in hospitalizations. Hundreds of thousands of Americans are unemployed because of the coronavirus pandemic, and some people do not have unemployment insurance, which only exacerbates the situation. Not having federal leadership on this, having a president who is very mendacious and who likes to spread disinformation and misinformation on social media, that only it only throws more fire on the problem. It only throws more fuel. It does not quench the fire, and that is the problem. As I said before on the Jeremiah Patterson Show, my podcast, the CDC is projecting that 233,000 Americans could be dead by the end of this month. We are seeing hotspots all over the country, and that news is concerning. Coronavirus outbreaks in prisons, nursing homes, immigration detention facilities. We are not in a good position right now as these coronavirus cases are continuing to rise. We are not in a good position right now, but we can improve as a nation. We can improve individually and collectively, all of us together as American citizens. If we just continue to wear a mask and socially distance and do the necessary health and take the necessary health precautions to protect others and yourselves from contracting this lethal disease, because that is what we need right now as coronavirus cases are continuing to rise throughout the whole country. Thank you for listening to this very special report of the Jeremiah Patterson Show YouTube channel. We're going to have more reporting on the coronavirus pandemic tomorrow on the podcast. Make sure to join me for that. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great day. Remember to stay positive and inspired. Make sure to like this video. Also, subscribe and share this video with your friends and family. Thank you again for listening. I'll see you tomorrow.